Their revolutionary tactics would change the way war was fought forever. They would march further than any soldiers before them and crush all opposition. In one afternoon, they would defeat the proudest civilization of their day. Led by the greatest general in history, they would forge an empire that stretched from Greece to the Indus River. As the mists of dawn lifted on an autumn day in 338 BC, the pride of ancient Greece was challenged by an upstart from the north. King Philip II of Macedonia had come to fulfill a bold dream, uniting the Greek city-states by force. Now 2 of these states stood together against him, Thebes and Athens. Among the Macedonians preparing to do battle was a young officer named Caenis. Little did he know that this was just the beginning, that one day he would journey to glory undreamed of and lands unheard of. King Philip sat uneasy on his throne. Macedonia, a rural land to the north of Greece, was as fractious as it was rugged. The loyalty of the peasants extended no further than their local lord. By marriage, diplomacy, bribery, and force, Philip molded Macedonia into a united and powerful nation. But his ambition was greater still. Eyeing Greece, he dreamed of an empire. As the Macedonians outgrew their land, young men followed a route to a better life: service in the king's army. Rich and poor enlisted with high expectations. They would not be disappointed. Coming from martial stock, Caenis was destined to be a warrior. His father had estates and influence, so he entered the army as an officer. But he was drilled as relentlessly as any recruit. As a youth, Philip had spent 3 years as a hostage of the Thebans. This had enabled him to study their army and to improve on it. By doubling their 8-rank phalanx and arming his warriors with a long pike, he devised an infantry formation that resembled a hedgehog and was just as difficult to penetrate. But as well as capitalizing on the military strength of the Greeks, Philip also took advantage of their weaknesses. Unlike them, he would wage war all year round, giving his enemy no time to prepare or recover.
I need not mention that he makes no distinction between summer and winter, that he has no stated season of repose.
In the summer of 339 BC, in a war waged ostensibly to revenge an insult offered to the Delphic god, Philip led his men south towards the Greek heartland. Even their method of march was revolutionary. Philip had done away with the long train of supply wagons that so slowed an army. Each man carried his own weapons and mess kit.
Any location sufficed for their camp. any food for their provisions.
As the invaders approached, farmers tried to hide their livestock and their crops, but it was to no avail. Lightly equipped, moving fast, the Macedonians lived off the land. Even on campaign, they kept up a high level of physical and military training. By day, the archers, slingers, and javelin throwers who made up the light infantry, the troops deployed on either side of the phalanx, spent every available hour perfecting their aim. As night fell, they prepared to rub salt into the wounds they would inflict by carving taunts on their missiles. Before Philip, Macedonian warfare had been the preserve of nobles who took part in wild charges on small ponies. Philip organized them into a disciplined body of heavy cavalry that rode in a wedge-like formation as formidable in its way as the phalanx. Striking the enemy line at its weakest point, often from the rear, his horsemen would drive it apart. It was yet another revolution in warfare. In April 338, on the plain of Chaeronea in Boeotia, Philip's army found its way barred by more than 30,000 Greeks. They wore heavy bronze armor and advanced with their short spears held at the shoulder. When they locked in combat, they would thrust at Philip's men from behind their wall of shields. But the Macedonians under Caenis were armed with a weapon that gave them a decided advantage: the sarissa. Held under the arm, it was a 6-meter-long pike, tipped with a 30-centimeter blade, twice the size of its Greek counterpart. Bristling with long pikes, this was the Macedonian phalanx.
Each man of the first rank has the points of 5 pikes extending beyond him. Those further back than the 5th rank hold theirs slanting over the shoulders of those in front, so as to protect the whole formation, keeping off by this serried mass of pikes all missiles.
The first and last ranks wore heavy breastplates. The troops within the phalanx, needing only a light shield, were relieved of the burden of armor, and Philip was relieved of its cost. Thus could he field such a large army. So long as its lines remained unbroken, this forest of pikes could not be penetrated. It was the job of the phalanx to punch a hole in the enemy line. Then the companions, the elite heavy cavalry, would drive their wedge through it, creating panic and confusion in the enemy's rear. Thus did Philip deploy his 30,000-strong army. 3 phalanxes of heavy infantry, each 8,000 strong in the center. 6,000 light infantry on either side. 2,000 heavy cavalry under his 18-year-old son Alexander, waiting in the wings.
Horses and men, gleaming not with gold, not with multicolored clothes, but with iron and bronze.
The outcome of the battle would decide just who was the dominant force in ancient Greece: Macedonia or the city-states of Athens and Thebes. The two armies, a total of 60,000 men, advanced across the plain.
The blood really flowed, for the two lines were so closely interlocked that they were striking each other's weapons with their own and driving their blades into their opponents' faces. It was now impossible for the timid and the cowardly to remain inactive. Foot against foot, they were virtually engaging in single combat, standing in the same spot until they could make further room for themselves by winning the fight. Only by bringing down his opponent could each man advance.
Thrusting with their sarisi, Caenis and his comrades tried desperately to force the Greeks to give ground, but they would not budge. Then, as the battle reached its height, Philip signaled his right flank to fall back.
The Greek general cried out, "We've got to keep attacking until we push the enemy back to Macedonia." Philip remarked, "The Greeks don't know how to win."
As the Macedonian right continued to retreat, the Greeks grew in confidence. Philip's troops had failed to penetrate their own smaller phalanxes. Now demoralized and exhausted, the Macedonians were pulling back. The opportunity was too good to miss. Sensing victory, the Greeks surged forward. But what looked like a retreat was in fact a well-rehearsed plan to lure the unsuspecting Greeks to their doom. For it was the surest way to disrupt their stubborn discipline. Such a ruse would be practiced with equal success by William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings just over 1400 years later. As the Greek left wing charged, their line split, just as Philip had predicted it would. Into the gap hurtled the Macedonian heavy cavalry, led by Prince Alexander. The whole Greek line buckled, then broke. Vulnerable, without the protection of their rigid phalanx, they were cut down by Philip's horsemen. The Greek army was destroyed. A lion would mark the graves of the Theban sacred band, an elite unit wiped out by the Macedonians in a matter of hours. Celebrating their victory in typical Macedonian fashion, Caenis and his men wallowed in an orgy of drinking.
They paraded through the midst of the captives, jeering all the time at the misfortune of the luckless men.
That night on the field, Caenis lay exhausted, yet this battle for Greece was but the prelude to a harder campaign against a greater foe. Just over 2 years after the Battle of Chaeronea, King Philip was stabbed to death during the celebration of his daughter's wedding to the King of Epirus by a discontented member of his own bodyguard. At the age of 20, his son Alexander took up his father's sword and his greatest ambition, the conquest of their ancient enemy, Persia. With the new king came new prospects for Caenis. Given command of his own regiment in 334, he was part of the experienced Macedonian army of 30,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, which invaded the seemingly impregnable Persian Empire. It was a land that could be as hostile as its army. But the ingenious Macedonians took it all in their stride. Leather tents were turned into inflatable boats to ford rivers. The troops marched at night to avoid the strength-sapping desert sun. Ionia, land of the bards and fatherland of Homer, was conquered in just a few months. That same year, the first of the campaign, Caenis was allowed to return home. Gradually, the war took him ever further from Macedonia. No obstacle was capable of impeding Alexander's army. In 333 BC, he defeated the Persian field army at the Battle of Issus. Thereafter, city after city fell. Thousands of Persians deserted their king Darius III to swell the ranks of the victorious Macedonians. The following year, this unstoppable force came up against an object that would not yield. The harbour city of Tyre. Situated a kilometre off the coast of what would become the Lebanon, Tyre was an island fortress with walls 50 metres high and 6 metres thick. It was also one of the main bases for the Persian fleet. Its resistance would test the Macedonians to the limit. Possessing no ships of his own, Alexander was forced to besiege Tyre from the land side. To make this possible, his engineers embarked in an unprecedented feat, a causeway 70 meters wide leading to the fortress. Caenis's men cut down trees on the slopes nearby and drove 2 rows of trunks into the shallow channel. Between the rows, they piled huge stones. As the Macedonians' causeway crept towards the fortress, the defenders poured down a constant hail of rocks, arrows, and hot sand. Armor might deflect arrows, but the burning sand was sure to work its way beneath. It was so painful that men dived into the water for relief, only to be drowned by the weight of their armor. To counter this threat, Alexander's engineers built huge siege towers, 60 meters tall, coated in animal hides and lime. From atop them, Caenis directed his troops to return fire and clear the battlements. Ever resourceful, the Macedonians had developed the first torsion-sprung catapults, powered by strips of twisted leather. At 400 meters, they could hurl rocks and arrows through the ranks of defenders. At 150 meters, they could damage the city walls. In desperation, the Tyrians sent a fireship against the Macedonian towers and set them ablaze. Hundreds of men perished. Alexander responded by ordering new siege towers to be built, and the causeway widened to 60 meters. And so the siege went on. Eventually, Alexander's engineers constructed even higher towers and galleys with iron battering rams suspended above their decks. It was all too much for the beleaguered defenders. The walls were breached in several places, and Caenis and his men stormed into the city. Alexander himself led the second wave of attackers, hacking and stabbing as they went. The slaughter was savage. Enraged by Tyrian atrocities and the 7-month siege, the Macedonians showed no mercy. More than 8,000 Tyrians were killed in the attack. A further 2,000 were crucified along the shore. The remaining 30,000, those who had not been shipped to safety in Carthage and Sidon, were sold into slavery. By 330 AD, the rest of Persia had fallen to Alexander. But still, the Macedonians pushed ever eastward. 7 years later, having defeated all opponents, they reached the valley of the Indus. But drenched by monsoons and suffering from homesickness, they would go no further. They had had enough. One man plucked up the courage to speak. Caenis.
Sir, I do not propose to speak as an officer, but for the common soldier. My age, the repute which by your favor I enjoy amongst my comrades, and the unhesitating courage I have displayed in all danger and difficulties, give me the right to declare what I believe the soundest policy. Only a few from that great army are left. A small remnant, broken in health, their old vigor and determination gone. Every man of them longs to see his parents again, if they still survive, or his wife, or his children. All are yearning for the familiar earth of home, hoping pardonably enough to live to revisit it, no longer in poverty and obscurity, but famous and enriched by the treasure you have enabled them to win. Sir, if there is one thing above all others a successful man should know, it is when to stop.
Caenis was cheered by his men. The tide had turned against endless conquest. Grudgingly, Alexander abandoned his ambition to reach the Ganges, the fabled limit of the world. Relieved, the Macedonians turned for home. In time, a new army from a younger empire would sweep over Macedonia, the Romans. But even they stood in awe of the martial prowess of the Macedonians. One Roman general who fought them never forgot.
He later often confessed to his friends at Rome that he had never seen anything more alarming and terrifying than the Macedonian phalanx.
In the service of Alexander the Great, Caenis had helped mold the largest empire the world had yet seen, and the greatest army. He himself had risen far through the ranks, and traveled farther than any soldier before him. But he never saw his home again. Like Alexander, he died on the long road back to Macedonia. And like his king, he was cremated on a funeral pyre, as befitted his rank, with all the ceremony possible in an alien land.